Sweden, Germany, Germanic country. How hard can it be? Let's take it on.
Hello and welcome to the Auto Ethnographer. I'm John Stech, your host on this journey. We travel the globe to bring you stories about culture and the global automotive industry. Fasten your seatbelt and let's get started. This episode was recorded on Friday, the 28th of March in Bangkok, Thailand, exactly 1 hour after a 7.7 magnitude earthquake shook the city and the region. Although I was able to continue with my normal operations, many were not so lucky. I dedicate the episode to the victims of the earthquake in Myanmar and Thailand. Hello and welcome to the Auto Ethnographer. Today I have a special guest. I have Andreas Schlegel. He's coming in live from the UK, although normally he resides in Switzerland. Andreas has a long, rich history in marketing and dealer network development. He's worked with brands that probably make anybody jealous. Porsche, Aston Martin, Lotus Motorcars, Mercedes-Benz, Volvo cars, and even a Formula One team, Williams. He's led global marketing at Lotus Motorcars and Aston Martin. He led global retail strategy at Volvo cars and at Aston Martin. And at Williams Racing, he was part of the executive committee. As you can imagine from the brands, Andreas spent some time working in Germany, the UK and Sweden, as well as some shorter stints in South Africa and in the United States. His roles were usually global in nature, so he had to work with countries across the globe to implement campaigns and strategies. With that, I'd like to welcome you, Andreas. Welcome to the Auto Ethnographer.
Thanks, John. I'm really pleased to be here. Great pleasure and honor. And I hope I can share some of my stories with you, and hopefully to the audience, they might be of interest.
Maybe let's go back to the beginning. If you want to start there, we can. You used a word to describe your first role, which almost nobody can pronounce, which is Nachwuchsgruppe.
Yeah.
Maybe we can start there.
Nachwuchsgruppe was a great opportunity to get into the industry, and
what is it?
Well, what is it? They called it, I think the English term was an international management trainee program, very long-winded. And I started there in 1998 after graduating from school. And I think the seed of working internationally and dealing with different people and cultures was probably planted a lot earlier than that, because way back in 1990, so that's 35 years ago now, it makes me feel really, really old. I for the first time left Germany to live abroad in America when I went to Columbine High School in Colorado. And I think that kind of created that curiosity, that interest to go out and explore and find out. And when then in 98, I had the opportunity through Mercedes to join that trainee program. I think it was simply a result of what happened before. And I thought, wow, this is fantastic. This is a once in a lifetime. This is, in football terms, the Champions League, how to start a career. And I was really thrilled to do that. And it took me through, obviously, the headquarters in Stuttgart. It took me to America, to Montvale. That's where we met I think that was in 99, where I met you and the colleagues, Greg and Christian, and a fantastic time. And then it took me down to South Africa, because as not being an engineer, I thought, what, I'll never get to see a plant shop floor operationally with the degree and the background I have. Why not do it during a trainee program? So it was a fantastic time. It was really cool.
What was your experience like in New Jersey versus South Africa? I mean, these are two completely different places and two completely different experiences. One was sales and marketing. The other one was, as you said, manufacturing.
In those days, why go to the US? Because it was still the biggest market in the world. China was not relevant in those days. And I thought, I had been a big fan of America before already, because I studied there. I went to high school there, and I thought, yeah, I'd like to see how does it work in the US? How is retail done? how are they running the biggest subsidiary of Mercedes-Benz. And it was fantastic. I learned so much. In particular, the one thing that later in my career I realized many times that in the US we focused very much on certified pre-owned vehicles and how to market them very professionally, how there's money to be made through the second and the third life cycle of a car. And maybe that's the reason why I've always been a big advocate of CPO programs, because in those days, in 99, I learned the importance of it, obviously from a brand perspective, but also from a retailer's perspective, because when new car sales are maybe not as brilliant as they should be, it's a second leg to stand on next to the service business, and that's I think those were my first interactions and experiences with the retail business, and understanding that there are three legs, sales, used car sales, and service that the business is built on. So an important lesson to learn in, at the time, the most important market in the world.
And then you transitioned to South Africa, I think, afterwards, right?
Yeah, and I mean culturally, what I liked in New Jersey was it was very direct. It was very hands-on. It was a lot less corporate than it was back at HQ in Stuttgart. And for some reason, I think I clicked well with the American style of, no bullshit, straight to the point, cut to the chase, very, very honest and transparent. And in a way, it was very similar down in South Africa. But again, there were many things that were very, very different. I was sent down there to support the head of manufacturing. And as you can imagine, not just in a German company, it was Mercedes in those days was still very Swabian, very Southern German. So the gentleman who ran manufacturing, a lovely guy from Sindelfingen, was sent down there to basically lay the foundation for the W20, was it 203 or 202? It was the new C-Class, which we intended to produce globally as a right-hand drive car in South Africa. And the gentleman was sent down there because he was an absolute legend in Sindelfingen. He knew how to build cars. He knew how to ensure quality. But when he had arrived in South Africa, there were professional challenges and there were personal challenges, because his wife just had a stroke, which put a lot of topics on his plate. And secondly, his English was, I would say, maybe not up to the level in order to converse and speak to the South Africans in a way that everybody understood what he meant. So he said, fantastic to have you here, because he just managed to offload a lot of stuff to me. So I kind of became the interface between him and his first line managers. So we had simple challenges like, the assembly line would start, I think it was 7:30 or 8 o'clock in the morning. And what happened very often was people were not ready. People were not in the plant. What do we do? Culturally, big challenge. So he said, just have to think about it. What can we do to make sure people are on time? And I said, okay. I spoke to the line managers. They were not happy about this. So we said, let's do a very basic time tracking system, meaning every workstation had everyday sheets of people that were meant to be there. And if someone's late, he gets a mark. So we did it. I prepared that. I communicated with them, and we communicated that to the teams. And all of a sudden, people realized, bloody hell, I need to be at work on time when the line starts. You could see people running towards their workstation. And yeah, it was a very old-fashioned way of doing things, but at least it worked. So no, it was good times professionally and also socially, because I think we had a great bond down there in the team. And in the end, successfully, we launched that right-hand drive C-Class. That was even produced in South Africa for markets like Japan, where customers were really, really critical and looked at the shut lines of the car, and like in no other market in the world.
After you had your South African adventure, you went back to the mothership in Stuttgart, and you spent some time there in the office before striking out on a new adventure. And any big observations about work in Stuttgart versus what you experienced in the other two locations?
Well, I brought a lot of things back that I learned, because being out in the market, it was, fast, it was hands-on, it was not many PowerPoints, it was just getting things done. And then I came back into HQ in the famous Möhringen headquarters, and instead of wearing a pair of chinos and a shirt, you had to show up in a suit, and it was those days very old-fashioned. And I thought, wow, it's kind of different here. I had to adjust again, and which I did, but I felt it was less fun, because it was very hierarchical. It was very much, what the boss wanted, and very old school. Anyway, I did that, and I tried to fit in, and did the best in what was called a regional strategy team. And my boss reported to the senior VP of marketing and sales at the time. So it was at the top of the company, but the work style and the atmosphere was very, very different. You sat in your office from early in the morning until late at night. It was very silent in the corridors, and no one tried to make a noise. It was the days when Mercedes was clearly a traditional German OEM, very different from what it is probably now.
As I recall, you really shifted gears into something not quite as traditional, or I should say, stayed.
I was approached to join a different company, which by coincidence was in the same town, meaning Stuttgart, meaning Porsche. And at the beginning, I thought, why should I leave Mercedes? Because I felt really, really strongly about the brand. Being a Swabian boy, having grown up with a Mercedes in the garage all my life, it was not an obvious to leave that brand. But what kind of drove me was first interviews, first conversations I had with people in Porsche. And I'll never forget, the final stage was having a meeting with the Senior Vice President, Marketing and Sales, Hans Riedel at the time, in Ludwigsburg, where marketing and sales were located. And he said to me, listen, Mr. Schlegel, if you join us here, whatever you do, whatever you don't do, whatever you perform, will be very visible. You'll be on a silver plate every day of the year. And that's the culture here. So we're moving fast, but we expect a lot from you. We reward, but you have to push. We have to turn this place around. We just come out of making losses. We are in preparation of a third model line, which at the time was the Cayenne. So if you're up for a challenge, if you want to roll up your sleeves, if you want to make a difference, this is the place to be. And I thought, you know what? I really like that. I was inspired by him, and I thought, I think I have to take this challenge. And so I think it was in 2000, I decided to leave Mercedes and to join Porsche.
It must have been a tremendously different environment to work in. You also then had a role that had a somewhat similar to Mercedes-Benz, a more global, I guess, a more global audience or responsibility, correct?
Yeah. I mean, my first role in Porsche was about the dealer network and basically setting up a performance measurement performance measurement system similar to a balanced scorecard on a retail level. Because see, we made tremendous investments into Cayenne, which should double the sales volume of the company, and equally, we were a bit nervous that the dealers would be able to kind of manage that in terms of their balance sheets, in terms of coping with the volume, in terms of facilities. Everything about retail, we were concerned because the network was not prepared for that. And from a business management point of view, we wanted to have certainty that we're not overloading the dealers with too much of a burden. We want to make sure they can manage the volume, they can manage the finances, but we had no idea who was making how much money. So the challenge I was given was set up a global, we called it a KPI system or a business management system, and implement that with the key markets. So again, it was, like you said, it was a global project. We then spoke to the worldwide sales and marketing organization, and there were some, obviously, I would say more proactive markets, and then maybe some more, well, less reactive markets. The ones that saw the need and saw the benefit was the UK. And then others like Italy, France followed very quickly. So we kind of built a cluster and said, okay, let's categorize them as a pilot markets. Let's do it in those markets first. And then let's see whether the others will follow. And that's what we did. So in particular, the UK was tremendously strong. They had the right mindset. They worked the dealers through KPIs, and they wanted to have something new because the old way of looking at it, I think, was still based on a VW platform and N400s, very, very old school. So they said, no, we need something a lot more modern. So I triggered that with the UK team. Hence, I think I also developed a strong relationship to the UK from a business perspective, because I felt when it comes to car retailing, they are very, very forward thinking. They're very modern. They're very fast in the way they manage retail. And so that worked out really, really positively. And very soon we had our case study that proved that the system was good. The dealers see a value in it. The national sales company sees a value in it. France and Italy then managed to follow. And then all of a sudden it snowballed, and, Japan jumped on the bandwagon. Australia, because of the UK connection, thought, that might be a good thing for us. So I reached out to the regional presidents in those countries. And I think then at some point Germany came around and said, oh yeah, we'll do that as well. And what was a small project, became a global initiative. And I would say my role in that was reaching out to these countries, to the people in a collaborative way, and taking their thoughts and considerations into account, and setting up the standard, and then give it the right momentum so it would become a global initiative, which I must say, I think up until this day, that kind of tool is still in place, and it's probably something small to be proud of.
So that gave you a lot of experience convincing some of the different leaderships in the different markets. But then you yourself actually moved into a new role, which took you to a different vantage point, right? You actually work directly for the head of sales and marketing, which gives you a completely different view of the world.
As I said earlier, I'll never forget that meeting in Riel's office in Ludwigsburg, and all of a sudden, I had the opportunity to work as his executive assistant, kind of a lieutenant who gets to see everything. And what an insight into a company that was highly dynamic, highly driven by the CEO, Mr. Wiedeking at the time, with a very special culture in those days. Work hard, play hard. It was very direct, very emotional. Sometimes, I don't want to say personal, but tough for some individuals who didn't have a thick enough skin. But at the same time, we were a team that wanted to change Porsche and the automotive world, we were the underdog. So we were always kind of kicking everybody else in the shin by kind of finding exceptions in regulations such as the German block or the European block exemption regulation, which again had an exception for small players like us. In the way we went to market, Porsche was always looking for a better solution than everybody else had, and that kind of underdog mentality I really, really liked, and being exposed to these top management topics was just exceptional. From things like Porsche design to new product developments, and in the end, I was probably one of the first people who got exposed to the whole plan of taking over VW that was around 2005, 2006. So it was massively interesting, and a great place to learn and to grow.
Then you took the experience from Porsche and you applied it to another company that is very well known for their high performance vehicles, probably just as well known for who drives them, the famous, British spy James Bond 007. How was the shift over to Aston Martin? This was your first time having really a fixed full-time employment with a company in a new country.
Having worked with the UK before, in my first job in Porsche, and getting to know the Brits and especially the Porsche UK team at the time, I thought, what can be so difficult? Whether it's Porsche or Aston Martin, I think I thought I knew how they work. I thought I knew how they tick. So taking on a job in Aston Martin, I thought it's a piece of cake, but it wasn't. Initially, I mean, my connection there was Dr. Uli Bates, who was the CEO at the time, and very, very admirable engineer. And he gave me that opportunity to kind of manage a team and to really make a contribution there. But when I came to the UK in 2007 at the time, I thought the Porsche formula would also work in Aston Martin. And I clearly learned very quickly that it didn't. And maybe I give you an example through an anecdote. When we intended to launch the first DBS and the Vantage 4.7 in 2008, and we were preparing that launch. It was down in Ascari in Spain, and I thought, wow, fantastic! This is my first global car launch to the dealers, and I'm responsible for it. Great. So I remember having that one conversation with the engineering team, and I said, guys, this is planned now for early next year. Can I be sure that whatever the number was, it was like 25, 30 cars, that they will be ready for the launch, because that's when I need the cars. And then now in 2007, I now need to commit to hotels, to the track. I need to spend money. I need to make payments. I was out of pocket. And I said, I need to be certain that these cars will be ready, because otherwise I'm stuck with the cost and I don't have a product. And they said, not so sure. We don't know yet. We'll do our best that it will happen, but we can't promise you. I said, well, it's very simple. In my world of Porsche, I said, if you don't meet these deadlines, which we've agreed for many, many months, you just need to cover my sunk cost, because I don't have the money for it and I can't spend it twice. Whew. I tell you, that created a bit of a storm in the engineering department, because I had the head of engineering coming at me, and Ian Minards was his name. And he said, Andreas, this is not how we work. You can't put the cost on engineering if you want to launch this car, and we'll do our best to make it happen. But you need to stick to your responsibilities, and you can't push that over to us. And I thought, okay, the Porsche style wouldn't work here. And I learned my lesson in the end. And that's maybe a fascinating thing about the UK, and in particular about the company in those days. It did work out. The cars were there. on time. We managed to do a fantastic event. We had the global deal organization go through the cars and experience them over, I think it was a 3-week window down in Ascari, including the press launch. We had great reviews, and in the end, what made it happen was teamwork. It was not applying pressure as we would have done in Porsche, and it's a different way of speaking to people. It's a different way of involving them, and those kind of examples were, I think, important for me to learn when dealing, in this case, with the Brits. But it also applies when you work with other cultures and nations.
So beyond the different environment of working between Aston Martin and Porsche, there's the brand itself, right? There's this Britishness about the brand. Can you talk about that a little bit? Because Porsche was always about really engineering, performance, technology, but that's not necessarily what Aston Martin was about.
The Britishness, it's always been a strong asset for the brand, and especially in those days, the Bond theme was very prominent. The British agents, so I think the combination of the two made a perfect match, and it felt like you can rock up anywhere in an Aston Martin, and you don't get envy from people that look at you. You don't get, the middle finger. You don't get kind of bad looks or the kind of things you get if you rock up maybe in a German or an Italian sports car. And I must say, I've experienced that myself when I sometimes was lucky enough to drive an Aston Martin, and you're stuck in a traffic jam. People always let you in when you have to change lanes. It's always the thumbs up, and it's the admiration. And I think an Aston Martin comes with style. It doesn't come with the negative connotations that some of the others do. And I do believe that the Bond connection plays a great part in this positive connotation, to say, well, an Aston Martin is not just a sports car. It's a sports car with style and elegance. And if you look at James Bond and the way he portrays the image in the movies, being well dressed in a suit, as a gentleman, that's what we heavily banked and focused on in those days. It's a gentleman who drives an Aston Martin, and not somebody who does a dodgy business, somebody who is shady and deals with awkward people. It's a gentleman. It's someone who's achieved, and I think it's always been a great brand asset, probably up until this day, which played an important role for the sophisticated kind of customer who considered buying a very expensive sports car.
Now, you were responsible for the sales operations for Asia Pacific region for Aston Martin. How did all of this translate over to Asia?
In those days, I must say, Japan was the biggest market, because China was not as strong yet, and it's an exotic car to begin with. So in Japan, we had a few very, very strong dealers, and I think most of them are still around today. But it's a very long. Usually, it's a very long-winded experience. The customers are very careful about their decisions, and it's almost like a mythical experience to buy an Aston Martin there. To really, you go several times to the dealership. You want to see the car. You want to sit in the car. They look underneath the car in the best case, and it's a well thought through decision to put yourself into an Aston Martin, and that kind of as I said, mythical image that they buy into. I think it's even stronger in Asian markets than it probably is in the UK, which it's still special in the UK, but it's the home market, so it's very different. And in Asia, it's something very, very special to buy and to own an Aston Martin.
Your next role in the company was to manage the global dealer network. I would imagine that the dealers had to be quite special as well, not only the customers, but the dealers. How was it to work with dealers around the world? Are dealers the same everywhere, or are they really different by region?
I think they're very different by region. I mean, as always, you have the American dealers that are, they're very different because they're usually multi-franchise dealers. In many cases, it's almost like you're driving into a car mall and you have the luxury brands lined up. So there is a Aston Martin, Ferrari, there's a Lamborghini. And I would say the challenge we always faced was that in Aston Martin, that the dealers would guide the customer to whichever is maybe an easier sell, not necessarily only focus on your brand, but focus on what's easiest, what's best for them. Whereas in other markets, we open in my days back then, we opened up Brazil for the first time. We opened up South Korea. We opened up China. And where we set up new dealerships, it was all about exclusivity. It was about dedication, focus. So I think in those new markets, we had the chance to avoid a dealer selling several brands in parallel, but to really make sure they focus only on us, which I think made a big difference to how we represent or how they represented the brand in their local market.
My experience traveling around, especially in Latin America and even in Russia, for example, was that there was a certain pride of the dealer with respect to the facility that they built. How did you experience that? Some dealers want to build the smallest facility possible, and others want to build something that's, much too large for the operation that they require.
If you go to places like India and to some extent in China, you could say big is beautiful, and that was the rule that applied. And sometimes you think, we don't need that big of a showroom, because if we're only selling 60, 70 units in a location, we don't need a showroom for 10 cars, right? And in particular, in those days, we had a much smaller product lineup. It's about, sometimes you have to be conscious and careful of managing the investors as well, because you need to protect them from themselves. Meaning, if they overinvest, they won't be happy with the returns. They won't be happy with the profitability. And I think as a manufacturer, dependent on the region, you have a duty of interfering in this case and make sure the investment is in a reasonable balance to what you actually can sell. Yeah, no question about that. But it's also about egos, and as you know, especially in Asia, a bigger dealership means I'm more powerful, I'm more important, and not always an easy conversation to have when someone says, "No, I'm going to invest $10 million into this showroom," and you think, "No, actually, 5 would do." It's not about the money. It's about having a bigger dealership than the friend who runs maybe Lamborghini, right? So it's not always rational, but hey, that's what it's like.
Speaking of additional two-door sports car brands, since you brought up Lamborghini, but that's not where we're going here. You took an opportunity to go to Lotus Motorcars, which had for quite a long time been producing a relatively small model lineup. The cars had remained unchanged for quite some time, actually. And I think you arrived at Lotus Motorcars as the head of marketing at a really interesting time. Can you talk about that? That must have been a really interesting experience.
It was an interesting experience in many ways. I worked in Aston Martin beforehand, and I was quite happy doing what I was doing. We managed the financial crisis. We had, we had a lot on our plate, but it was a lot of firefighting and it was crisis management. And when I got approached to join Lotus Cars, that was beginning of 2010. A former colleague of mine said, "You know what? We try to turn around Lotus. We try to make this brand great again." And I thought, wow, I loved the idea of Lotus because it was all about lightweight, the legacy of Colin Chapman, and having the privilege to work as the head of marketing for such a brand it was giving you goosebumps, because you think, wow, I I felt I need to treat this brand like a raw egg, because I was so protective of it, because of all the history, and in Formula One and the sports cars with the Esprit, and again the James Bond legacy, with Roger Moore in those days. So a fantastic brand to work for, and I would say the team there there were kind of two camps. There was the Porsche camp, because the colleague that approached me came from Porsche as well, and there was again a Ferrari camp, and I thought, okay, I think we can handle this, we can manage that, and so I gave myself a push, and I said, I'm going to go for it, and I started the job in early 2010, and the CEO at the time, who was my boss, said, "I'd like to launch 5 cars at the Paris show," which was later in the year. And I thought, 5 cars in one go? No one's done this before. And that's why he wanted to do it. Now, maybe being a bit conservative, but also quite realistic and rational, I thought that's not a good idea. So I said, "Danny, listen, I think 1 car, if we launch the Esprit as a halo, I think that should do the job. That's enough. Because if we kind of spend all our firepower in one go, what else do we tell in the following years? I think we need to keep some things up our sleeves and play our cards gradually, step by step." But it was not a discussion or a debate. It was basically the boss said 5 cars in one go, and I thought, okay. I tried to make the best out of it. So it was a huge challenge, because, as I said, I started in early 2010. In September, there was the Paris Salon, and not much time to, let's say, redefine the corporate identity, to come up with something completely new. Luckily, I had from my previous employer, I managed to kind of pinch some people and make them join Lotus together with me. So we had to run very, very fast, but at least we knew each other. So we were, it was a well-oiled machine that we ramped up. And then we had this massive kind of press launch in 2010 in September. And it was crazy. And as I said, it was my idea to launch 5 cars in one go, but that's what he wanted, and that's what we did. But culturally, it was very challenging, because it was a clash of cultures. And unfortunately, the Porsche side of the business kind of faded out within a year or two. And the craziness of the CEO at the time took over. And that's when I realized this place might not be for me in the long run.
After this, you started your first foray into vehicles that have 4 doors.
True.
You also moved from one place that was not so sunny to a place that actually had even less sun, at least in the wintertime. You went up to Volvo, and you went back actually into something you'd worked on quite a bit, both at Porsche and at Aston Martin, which was dealer network management, dealer network strategy. How was that? That must have been a pretty big shift after some time working for 2 British brands, going up to Volvo, especially after Volvo was now kind of breaking free from its American management at Ford, and was now, working in a new direction under Chinese management and getting actually back to its Swedish roots.
That was about 2012, and I read a lot of stories about Volvo, so it was a very conscious decision when I was asked if I'd be interested in going to Sweden. Now, the first thing was I had to speak to my partner, Sarah, and I said, listen, there's a job in Sweden. I think it could be a fantastic challenge because of everything I read about Volvo, the turnaround. Stefan Jacobi was leading that. And I thought, brilliant, because I thought at the time Volvo was a much underrated brand, always having the ambition to be premium, but never really got there. The perception, especially in Germany, was it's a teacher's car. It's a bit of a boring car. It's all about safety. Well, not such a bad thing. But the brand didn't shine as much as it maybe did, in the 70s and the 80s. And I thought, could I be part of this? Could I make a contribution? I thought, yes, I can. I think this would be great. And secondly, being a bit naive in those days, when it came to cultures and countries and people, I thought, Sweden, Germany, Germanic country, how hard can it be? Let's take it on. So, funnily, my hiring manager at the time, also I think a German guy, said, let's get you started in July. And I said, okay, whenever you tell me, I'm flexible. I had a bit of playtime, and I started in July. So I rocked up in July in Sweden, and there was just no one around. And the people I did find around in HQ were, I think it was HR, and they were telling me, why did you decide to start in July? And I said, well, I don't know, because I was told to be here in July. They said, well, in July, we're all on summer holiday, at least for 4 weeks, if not longer. So there's not much for you to do here. And I was just puzzled. I thought, wow, this is very different. So that was the first cultural experience that the Swedes enjoyed their summer holiday. More on the professional side, it was again a great experience, and again I had to learn how does Sweden and how do Swedish companies operate. And it was really very much about involving people, creating a consensus, getting everybody on board, and really I mean everybody, because if you don't, you might get a spanner thrown into the works at the last minute and it all falls apart. So the Swedes like that collective agreement, and it was I learned that kind of way of thinking and working, sometimes the hard way, sometimes in a good way, but it was definitely something I had not been exposed to, neither in the UK nor in Germany. And we spent how long was it? It was nearly 5 years or something. No, more than 5 years, nearly 6 years in Sweden. I left in early 2018, and it was a fantastic time. We made great friends, even though it's not easy to break the ice. It's not easy to get under the skin of the Swedes on a social level.
Having also worked with Volvo at roughly the same time, I also found it to be very unusual with the decision making. Right, you had a room full of managers. You came to what seemed to be an agreement, and then as soon as the door to the room opened and people walked out, it felt like the agreement stopped.
Yeah.
and it's which is very different than working for a German company, where once everybody shakes hands in the meeting room and says, yes, we do it, you actually do it, and there's no more discussion. Right, this was very different. It required a little bit more work to get people in line, to get everyone to agree, and to actually start forward on whatever that decision happened to be.
Yeah, and interestingly, it reminds me of one kind of paradigm I've seen a few times. On the one side, obviously there's a big Swedish community that operates exactly as you said. And at the time, after Jacobi, we had Håkan Samuelsson as the CEO. Now, Håkan, having lived, I don't know how many years in Germany, working for MAN and so on, it felt like he had a German mindset. So he came in many occasions and said, this is what I want. This is what I want you to do. And the Swedes would be looking at him thinking, okay, this is one of our guys, but he has a very clear opinion in terms of what he wants. And he would be very, very rigorous and ruthless about the direction. So one example, I can probably talk about this a little bit, is the franchise model. He was not a big fan of dealers. He was not a big fan of putting extra marketing money behind cars to move them. So on one occasion he said, "They're stealing my money. I want an agency model. I want to sell direct. And I'm fed up with all this. Just do it." And I was like, oh, wow, not an easy task. So I got the task to develop a strategy, how we're going to implement an agency dealer model. And whilst he had already set his mind on that mission, on that strategy and the direction, the remaining managers from the Swedish community were by far not on board. So the discussion still happened while he was already on to the next thing, which didn't make it very easy. But you have to kind of clean up the pieces then behind him, and again, in a very Swedish way, then have individual meetings, convince people, and do, I would say, the change management bit as an aftermath of the direction of this particular CEO.
I've been joking a little bit that you've worked for companies that have 2-door cars. You went to Volvo, 4 doors, almost all of them. And now you had the opportunity, a car with no doors. Probably the the most exciting thing that you could have found actually in a career, which would be so exciting to hear about, is your stint at Williams Formula One racing team.
It was an interesting thing because it was, I think, in February or March 2022, when I had my first encounter with Williams Racing. I drove down to Grove and I met the team principal, Jos Capito, in the visiting center. And it was a cold day, it was icy, and I thought, Formula One team, who is this guy? What's this company all about? I mean, obviously I knew Williams from my days of watching Formula One, but being there and walking into the building, seeing, I think it was Keke Rosberg's F1 car there, I thought, wow, this is, again, very emotional, very much goosebumps. And I was welcomed by the head of HR, and then we were waiting for Jos to come, and he entered the room, and I thought, wow, I can work with that guy. I thought I loved it because it was very hands-on, very amicable, very sociable. And he explained to me what he's expecting. He said, I expect you to run very fast, but you need to run your own kind of business unit here, which was the heritage department, meaning F1 had changed dynamics massively in terms of the cost cap and in terms of leveraging things in cost cap and outside of cost cap, and how to be efficient with all of this. And what he asked me to do was to build up a separate business entity which restores and runs historic Formula One cars in order to generate work for the F1 team when they have flexibility to do so, but also to generate revenues from selling those cars or leasing those cars or finding operating models to have people enjoy those cars, obviously for a fairly large amount of money. And we already had a customer base of probably 15 to 20 people. One of them is actually a 4-time world champion. So, I mean, massively, massively exciting. The people you meet, the people you deal with, a great honor and a great pleasure. And, they're all passionate about motorsport and those kind of things. So in terms of you all on the same page, you all love the same thing, which was great. But then when it came to the working and the style of working, it was very high pace. Turning things around quickly, making decisions quickly was really, really key. And I'll never forget the first day when I actually joined the team. I think it was in September of the same year of 22. And having been in consulting before, I looked at my team and I could tell that they were wondering, what the hell is this consultant doing here, telling us what to do? And my answer to them was, listen, guys, I'm not here to tell you how to engineer those cars, how to put them together, because by far you're much more qualified to do that than I am. But my mission and my objective here is to set up this business unit to make this viable and actually to make money with it by what I just described, restoring and running these cars, and having had more than 120 chassis sitting in a warehouse that were not in operations. That was a fantastic challenge, and setting up collaborations with engine producers like Renault, like BMW, and others. That was something I felt hugely emotional about, and I thought, what a great business challenge. So we got this all in place. We laid the foundation. I did set up these collaborations, took the business on a different level, and the rewards were also fantastic, because I remember this one gentleman from London who had 3 chassis from, I think it was from, 1994. It was an FW16. So that's the car people associate with Ayrton Senna and with Damon Hill. He had 3 of these chassis, and all in bits and pieces, nothing working, obviously no electronics, no engine, no nothing. And he said, you know what, I want all of them to work. And I said, listen, this is going to be a huge, huge endeavor. And the hardest bit will be finding engines for you. He said, yeah, but you can make it happen. And it was about 6 or 7 months later, I gave him a call, and I said, listen, Jamie, I now managed to get confirmation for the first Renault engine for the first car. And he said, wow, I can't believe it. And it felt like a boy's dream coming true. And so we managed to get it agreed. And from that day onwards, we said, okay, let's kick off this project, because we now have certainty that we have an engine. Now we need to put the pieces together. We need to build those pieces that we didn't have, out of composite. We need to develop the electronics for it. We need to get that car up and running. And so it was a fantastic time with a fantastic team, which I built from, I think it was only 6 or 7 people in the beginning. And then we hired engineers, we hired more mechanics. We expanded in terms of workshop size. So I felt there was a really, really fantastic opportunity to set up the Williams Heritage for success. And I'm sure they're taking it to the next level now.
How have you maybe been influenced by these different, working cultures or national cultures? Do you find that that's changed you and made you a different person, or, you've picked a little something up from each one of them?
I would say, I think let others judge the way I operate or the way I work. I would say I hope I did, and I hope I'm. If I drew a comparison between 1998 and now 2025, gosh, 27 years, I would hope that I'm a more rounded individual that is more careful in the way I operate, in terms of how I read people, how I understand people, the things I say, the things, the comments you make when you enter a room. I think I'm more mindful of other people's backgrounds and perceptions, and so I think yes, I think it's a very rich kind of source of experiences, which I'm always happily to tap into, and I can put things much better in perspective, having lived and worked in many countries now, and I think that's probably one of my biggest assets when entering a new endeavor. that I've been to places, I've seen different cultures. I had to adjust, and what I do mean is not just going there, on a with a return ticket. I've gone full in. When I left Germany in 2007, there was no return ticket to Porsche. There was no return ticket to Mercedes. I had to make it work. I had to fight my way through it. I had to collaborate my way through it. And I think having gone through all of this makes me much stronger. And I think I'm kind of I've got my toolbox together now. And whatever comes as a next step, I hope I'm well prepared for it. So let's see what's next on the agenda after all these brands. Maybe it will be something a lot more boring. I don't know. But having also worked for these fantastic brands, equally, I think what's important to me now is the people I work with, and maybe it might be less glamorous in the future, but the people I'm going to work with, that will be the most important thing, because people make all the difference, whether it's in Sweden, in the UK, in Germany, or in America. In the end, it's all people business and understanding those people. And I think that's what's stuck with me.
These are incredibly meaningful words, and it's a fantastic story that you tell that ties all of that together. Well, Andreas, thank you very much for joining us today and to share your story. I think it's really meaningful and very inspirational for a lot of people, to have worked on so many incredible brands and in some really interesting locations. So thanks for joining us today. Really appreciate to have you on the Auto Ethnographer.
Well, thank you, John. It's been a pleasure, as always, when we speak. I'm really pleased I could share some of my stories with you and the audience. So thanks very much, and hopefully we'll catch up again soon.
Well, with that, I'd like to wrap up this week's episode. To all the listeners, thank you very much for joining in and listening. We'll be back next week with another very interesting guest. Until then, keep on driving. Thank you for joining us on today's journey. Please remember to like and subscribe to the Auto Ethnographer and leave us a rating or comment. For more information, visit our website at auto-ethnographer.com. You can also follow on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn.